Shalom and welcome to another Chamor podcast from Bay Abedan, teaching Noahide Judaism from Messianic Hebrews, and it's the third installment of our discussion of the origins of Islam with JC. Shalom, JC. Good to see you again. Thank you for coming back.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me over, and shalom, everyone. It's lovely. Always we start with a quick chat before we actually go on the live stream, and we end up actually talking for a really long time, getting into all the details. So, and our introduction earlier today has been really cool. So I really hope that people watching are really going to be as excited about this conversation as I am after seeing some of the slides that you have and all of the information that you have on this very important period of time leading up to the Umayyads.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, this is the important time for understanding how Islam begins to develop. Why do we have things like Qibla? Why are there 5 times prayer? Why do they have all the laws of the Sharia? All of this, and how this evolves and how this crystallizes into what we call Islam are from elements which are important as you follow the story and the journey of the development of the Arabic state through the time of the Umayyads until the early Abbasids. You don't even have to get to the Abbasid time because the period, the elements are all in place in the last decade of Umayyad rule. And of course, the Abbasids don't come out of nowhere and take power from nowhere. They actually are already a very powerful movement, and they're already a very successful campaign going on in the last decade of the Umayyad times. And then they take power. And that's really, when Islam starts to crystallize is with them. But the elements which they crystallize into Islam, that the Abbasids crystallize into Islam, have all been emerging throughout the Umayyad times. And so that's really all you need to do, is to study the Umayyad times to understand where the elements of Islam come from and how they crystallized in the Abbasid times. That's pretty straightforward. I think the Abbasid crystallization of Islam is very well documented. What's not documented, what we don't have any records about, is where the elements came from before it crystallized. And so hopefully we'll look at that today. So now the problem is where to start, really. I suppose we've got to start with a discussion on the last time we left off, we got to the sort of time of Uthman and the emergence of the Mus'haf of the Quran, the first Islamic Quranic Mus'haf, the basis of the text which eventually became the Islamic Quran as we know it, emerged in that time. And I made a brief mention about Pope Martin and how he was arrested for collaborating with the Saracens on their tome. Tome meaning a great big book and sacred or important book. And they arrested him and put him on trial. And with evidence, this is the Byzantine emperors arrested Pope Martin, put him on trial, found him guilty, and sentenced him to death. Then the Umayyads invaded the Mediterranean. That would actually be Uthman himself, really. He's called an Umayyad leader. He's not really an Umayyad. But Uthman himself invaded the Mediterranean, attacked the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantines commuted the sentence of Pope Martin, and instead of sentencing him to death, they sentenced him to exile instead. They exiled him to Crimea, as far as I remember, and where he died. And at the same time that they commuted his sentence to exile instead of the death penalty is when the Arabs stopped invading the Byzantines. So it was the end of their conflict, if you like, at that time. So that's
okay. And
that's quite
so
interesting.
that would have been around the year 650-ish.
Yeah, that's right. It's around that time. Then,
just out of curiosity, when they stopped their invasion after this, when they turned the sentence of Pope Martin, who would be the ruler at that time who actually basically stops the fighting because of that event?
Yeah, standard Islamic narrative is Uthman is still in control at that time, and I think there's no reason to doubt that. So yes.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. So there was some kind of respect, it seems, from the Saracens to these men of these holy men. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was any kind of collaboration between Pope Martin and Uthman, or the person who's supposed to be in charge at that time, which may have been, what we call Tajik. It may have been in charge at that time, or that might be Salman the Farsi was maybe or the Pharisee was in charge at that time. The point is that they felt that it was very wrong that this Pope should be subjected to an earthly authority of kings with divine right, exercising their power over this man of the cloth. And so I think that is actually the position that they were invading because they felt themselves to be protectors or defenders of faith. And they believed that the Byzantines themselves were apostate and outside of the faith. And that's why they defended them. Pope Martin himself, certainly, probably there is. I think. Well, they found him guilty of collaboration, so I think there had to be some solid physical evidence of the existence of this tome already in 650. Okay, so we can absolutely certainly say that there is a solid, independent evidence of the existence of the Book of the Arabs, if you like, in 650 at this time. Otherwise, how could they have any evidence against Pope Martin other than just empty accusations? And remember that the emperor was not the head of the church. The Pope was, or the bishops were. The Pope of Rome was an important head at that time. He wasn't necessarily the head of the church. There were maybe 5 major centers in those days, contrary to Roman Catholic doctrine, which says that the Pope of Rome has always been the head. There were maybe 5 important centers, but Pope Martin's would have been extremely important position. He would have had an extremely important position, and there's no reason to assume that they could have just made something up against him. They had to have solid evidence, otherwise the other bishops would have said, "Leave him alone." You see what I mean? There's too many religious men who would have come to his rescue.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there is something, we cannot actually jump to the conclusion of any sort of partnership, but certainly they were sympathizing with one another. That actually makes perfect sense. I'm going to try and say throw a curveball in here, yes, because of something that I find quite interesting, because of the date of 650, is that I know you're not probably a very big fan of the Sana palimpsest, but one of the things that I do sometimes is to see what the bottom layer contains and what it doesn't. And one of the surahs that has not been found, maybe it's there, but certainly they haven't been able to identify it, is Surah 18. I think it's Surah 18, the one that has the dual carnane and the sleepers in the cave, and this is a story about Moses walking around asking somebody to teach him how to read the signs. So those very weird stories, and they are not in that palimpsest. So to me, unless it's actually there but it hasn't been found, it looks like those would have been things added much later, perhaps to fluff out or to make the book bigger. But would you say that perhaps during the time of 650, the book that is floating around, the one that Pope Martin was sympathizing with, is not the fully completed Quran that we have now, but it would have been improved or other stories added much later? Well, would you say that is reasonable, or you think that it would have been pretty much final?
I think it wouldn't be too different from what we've got right now. There may be extra chapters there. There may have been some things. There may be some things missing. There may be things in the current Islamic Quran which were not there originally. But I don't think it would have been too different because I've seen. I mean, you can go through the text of the Paris Codex, for example, and compare it with a modern day Hafs copy of the Quran, and it's not too different. There are letters missing, there are letters added, there are diacritical differences, significant ones sometimes. There are words missing sometimes, small words missing sometimes, but the general gist of the story is about the same. I mean, we wouldn't say that it's word for word exactly the same, but the amount of difference is about the same kind of difference you'll find between variant readings of the Gospels. You know that there are variant readings of the New Testament, and they sometimes have a sentence missing here, a word missing here, an extra word there, and people have studied that very well in the Christian world, and they're not ashamed to say in the Christian world that there is no word for word exact copy of the gospel, throughout time, that variants have crept in here and there. Some strange reason in Islam they like to pretend that didn't happen, when all the evidence shows, every single piece of evidence we have, even from the standard Islamic narrative, says that there has never been verbatim word for word preservation of the Quran. I don't know why this lie evolved. It only evolved, as far as I'm aware. This popular narrative, populism, popular narrative only emerged from the 1975. But prior to 1975, nobody ever claimed in Islam that there was word for word unchanged preservation of the Quran. This sort of thing that Muhammad Hijab started to get push about, and they had this big conflict with what's his name?
Yazdgerd III?
Yes. They had this big fight a few years ago because Yasser said that it's not word for word preservation, and he's speaking from the standard Islamic narrative, and Muhammad Hijab was like, what? He was really upset about that, because the Islamists are following a lie which was never part of the standard Islamic narrative. Ironically enough, it's quite funny that what we consider to be standard Islamic narrative, that the Quran has never been changed, is not actually standard Islamic narrative. That's modern bid'ah, as they call it in Arabic. Bid'ah means innovation. It's a modern innovation that was the case. That was never the case. So
it is propaganda, and it is a very recent one, because if this was from the 11th century, you would say, okay, it's been around for a while. But when you think that it's been for maybe less than 100 years, this propaganda, you realize that Islam is actually a lot more renewed than any Muslims ever thought.
Yeah, exactly. So with regards to the exact nature of this book, which was around in 650s, I think we have most of it in hand. We don't think we've got all of it, but I think we got most of it in hand. And it wouldn't have been drastically different. Although, I do recommend people get hold of our friend Saint Murad's translation, word for word translation into Qurayshi Arabic, into English from Qurayshi Arabic. He starts with this translation. He starts with the assumption that, okay, everybody says that this Islamic Quran is Qurayshi Arabic. Now, what happens if we translate it from Qurayshi Arabic word for word into English? And you'll see it's utter nonsense. It means it's completely meaningless. It's like, what on earth is this all about? And it's really important to get hold of Murad's translation to understand the problem of the idea that this is a pure Arabic Qurayshi dialect Quran. You've got to read that to realize that that's a problem. That's a problem. So because the modern day Arabic Quran, Islamic Quran, I should say, because the modern day Islamic Quran is utter nonsense when you try and read it from the Qurayshi Arabic dialect, it's a good indication that it has been preserved from its early form in the 7th century, which was not the same dialect of Arabic which we assume it to be today. Because if you read it with Judeo-Arabic instead, 7th century Judeo-Arabic, it makes a lot more sense. It's very easy to follow. But so there are things which are the same, but there are also, in Murad's translation makes it clear that there are interpretations or readings and translations of this nonsense language, which are completely opposite to what the text is actually saying. Sometimes it's exactly the opposite of what is actually said in the text is the way the Muslims read it. And that really sort of allows us to, since the way that they, for example, verses which say, indeed, God has a son, are read as God does not have a son. even though it literally says he has a son, is no, God doesn't have a son. Now, Murad has tried to. Sorry, you want to say something?
So yeah, there are a couple of things that I haven't. I mean, I use the translation from Murad all the time, and it reveals everything that you have said, and actually a lot more. There are even different layers of how his translation actually exposes, like so many of the lies. It's just ridiculous. But it is. I find it quite useful sometimes to hear some things from this Arab that goes by the name of the Christian Prince, because he knows the Quran incredibly well, and sometimes he will say things that they made up rules in Arabic to fit the Quran. So things that he says, this is not Arabic. This is not even an Arabic rule. But because this is in the Quran, then they have adapted that. Otherwise, the Quran gets exposed. And he said one I didn't understand. I didn't really look into this, saying that a particular like numbering, you can go up to like 299 using the singular. And then when it gets to 300, it goes to the plural. It says it doesn't make any sense. It's just because otherwise something gets exposed from the Quran or something along those lines. And it's like, okay, so you have, it's say, edited your language so that you don't expose the Quran. Because like you have just said, a lot of the propaganda about perfect preservation and stuff is just from just a few decades ago. So it's all nonsense.
It's nonsense. It's nonsense. So anyway, we got kind of I think we got to the point that there was a book in existence in 650. It's generally the same, but there are some significant differences. In this book in 650, clearly God has a son, but nowadays the way you read the exact same words means God doesn't have a son. I was going to say that Murad tries to find a word in standard Qurayshi Arabic which tries to preserve a general meaning like that, but it still doesn't mean God doesn't have a son. It means something else, like there. What word does he use? I think I can't remember. I think he says, "If God has a son, then glorify him." I think that's the way Murad translates it. He tries to find a word, but the point is, it doesn't say God does not have a son, which is the standard way of understanding these things today. But in simple 7th century Judeo-Arabic, the verse is God has a son. Indeed, God has a son, and that's probably the basis of why Pope Martin ends up with a copy of this, is because probably they're saying, look, there's not much difference between us. Do we have any common ground? This is the book which this is the book of our. Because remember, I said that this wasn't a religious book. I was saying that this is a book of troubadour performances, street performances, propaganda, which was being promoted across the empire. And they probably simply sent a collection of their epic poetry to the Pope, and they were not embarrassed to do so because in their book they were on the same ground, saying, God has a son. The book is actually Miaphysite in its Christology, and Pope Martin may have been leaning towards that, because at that time there was a heresy going on in the Roman Church, which was basically a resurrection of this how many natures does Jesus have sort of discussion, and they had that discussion before, which had caused the emergence of monophysitism and diophysitism and Nestorianism, and then they had also what was it called? I can't remember. There was the Emperor Justin, I think, had tried to make an alliance with the monophysites in the past, and they had come up with a particular formula which was then criticized. And Heraclius had just done it again with monoenergism, and then there was also now floating around the idea of monothelitism. And so basically, I think that it's given the context, it's very likely that these Miaphysite Noahides in the Middle East would have sent a copy of their performances to Pope Martin, who could have even asked for a copy. Do you have a copy so I can read through all of these performances? And he could have even asked for a copy, and sure, this is what our performances say. So they could read through and make a decision on whether these performances, which were popular being performed on the streets, were heretical or not. And so that's probably all that happened, is that Pope Martin's administration has requested and got hold of a copy of this tome of these street performances, official state propaganda from the Arabic Empire, and the Byzantine emperors are using this as evidence to get rid of him, because Pope Martin may have developed a different position against the emperors at that time. Pope Martin might be thinking to himself, yeah, Miaphysitism is fine. These texts have got nothing wrong with them. And the emperors of the Byzantine Empire at that time were against that. They were trying to push monothelitism instead. And that could have really upset their progress of trying to push monothelitism at that time. And so hence Pope Martin gets arrested. Actually, that at the time that Pope Martin is arrested, I think they're pushing something called the Henoticon. I think they're pushing the Henoticon, which was an idea that the nature of Jesus should not be discussed. It should remain something which is a mystery, and nobody ever discusses it. That was the standard Byzantine position at that time. So if Pope Martin was involved in a discussion on the nature of Jesus with Arabs, with the Arab Empire, then that would mean that he was breaking the Byzantine law at the time, which says there shall be no discussion on this. And so that would probably be the reason why he was sentenced to death.
Right. And there is this source. I know that Islamic sources, they have to be taken with a pinch of salt for obvious reasons. But there is one that always bothered me, which is that they recorded the followers of Muhammad going to Ethiopia, I think, and then discussing their views on religion, and then all agreeing like, oh yeah, actually we have very similar beliefs. You know what? We should be friends. Something like that, which would be inconceivable when we consider the Islam that we now have. So we know that the roots were very different. But when we're thinking then about Uthman, so we have this period between Umar, Uthman, and Ali, and they have very different beliefs. Umar is the one probably that makes the first change, and things start to change, and all of that will then lead to the Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr. But if we look at those three guys, so Umar, Uthman, and Ali, would you mind explaining the difference between the beliefs of each of them? Which ones are of the same camp, and which ones are going to become the opposing camp, and the conflict will arise because of that?
Right. So Omar was a Karaite. I've mentioned that before, like of the Sadducee Karaite point of view, but he got converted to the Pharisaical position for Noahides. You have to understand that although Karaites call themselves Jews and identify as Jews, or Israelites at the very least, okay, maybe they don't call themselves Jews. Nowadays they call themselves Jews. Historically, they call themselves Israelites or children of Israel. So they don't really call themselves Jews. So although they call themselves children of Israel, identifying as people of Jacob's line, the Pharisee position on the Karaites is that they are apostate and therefore no better than non-Jews, okay, or maybe even worse than non-Jews, because they have committed apostasy, whereas a non-Jew can still be a Noahide and therefore be a righteous person. But a Jew who has turned, or an Israelite who has turned against the teachings of the scribes and the Pharisees, is an apostate and therefore worse than a Noahide. So the best thing for an apostate Jew to do is to come back to orthodoxy, and the first step on the way back to orthodoxy is to accept the teachings, the Noahide teachings, the teachings of Noahide Judaism. That's the first step back. So now Noahide Judaism is the basis of Islam and Christianity. Messianic Noahide Judaism is the basis of Islam and Christianity. And so Omar, as an apostate Jew, his first stop on the way home, from the point of view of the scribes and the Pharisees, is to become a Noahide. And that's what he did. He became a Messianic Noahide on the way home. Now, the next leader, but when he became a Messianic Noahide, he was killed not long after that. And he was killed probably by other other Sadducees and Karaites who disagreed with him becoming a member of the scribe and Pharisee camp. Okay, is that much clear so far for Omar?
Yes, but does it mean that the opposing factions, so say, for example, they either Uthman or Ali, perhaps both, they are still either Sadducees or basically they don't agree
Mm.
with his beliefs? Or do you think that
No, no,
Uthman, Ali already converted, just like Umar,
yeah,
but there are other people, there are other generals or whatever who just want him out of the picture, and he happens to be the one that takes the fall because he's at the top? So what is Uthman
yeah.
and Ali? Are they on the
Okay.
camp of um, Umar, or are they becoming basically his rivals because of beliefs, because of not
Initially,
converting?
so initially, I would say that the scribal and Pharisaical Messianic Noahide camp, the central point out of which these um, performances, which we call the Islamic Quran today, out of which they emerge, was centered around Ali, who I identify as Hani ibn Qabisa. That he was the central sort of prince that was pushing this. He was the political power, the political authority, who was pushing this position of the scribes and the Pharisees as the universal religion from the point of view of Orthodox Pharisaical Judaism. That was his position, and it was a messianic Noahide movement which Ali was pushing. Omar was an enemy to this initially, but he converted and then was killed. I think that the story of Omar's conversion is there in Islam, but they don't say that he converted and then was killed. They say that he converted early on and he lived a long time as a believer until he was killed. I don't believe that that's accurate memory. I think that's a false memory. But what actually happened was that he was an enemy to the movement for a long time, and in the very end, he converted and then he died. So hence, we can explain the conflict which exists between Ali and Omar much more logically if we understand that the conversion moment in Omar's life was not early on in his life, but was late on, towards the end of his life, very, very end of his life. That makes more sense of the conflict which exists between those two.
Okay, and I don't want to skip ahead because this is very fascinating. We'll go one step at a time, but just so that I get a different idea in my head. So we are during that period of Umar and Ali.
Yeah.
At that point, Muawiya is already in like around, and I think it's probably a very clear picture that they don't have an empire or the Islamic empire. They are not unified. There are all of these different lands that they have different rulers. They're probably all like allies to one another, but it is not a unified empire. And we also have then Muawiyah, probably a general. At that point, do you think that Muawiyah is, say, reporting into them? Are they part of that smaller empire of these guys, or is he a ruler of a completely different land, which later on, he's going to then want to fight Ali and so on? Is he reporting to them, or is he a different king from the, from the Syria area or something like that?
So Muawiya at this point, during the time of Omar and Ali, I don't think is significant for the Arabic Empire. I think Muawiya, during the time of this, when Omar is alive in the 640s until his death, okay, and I say that he died a little bit later than the standard Islamic narrative says. I say that he was alive in 644, for example, but it's not really important to quibble over that. But in this early 640s, Muawiya is really very much tied to Yazdgerd III and trying to. He's part of Yazdgerd III's Persian sort of loyalists, people who are loyal to the Persians. That doesn't mean that Muawiya was a Persian. His name is indicating that he was probably Syriac speaker, but he was loyal to the Persians. That's what I would say. You know that Yazdgerd, Yazdgerd III, was the last emperor of Persia, and he was conquered and maybe taken under the control of a group of people called the Al-Lahazim in some sources. The Al-Lahazim is basically they are the Sasanian sort of Arabs who served Khosrow II's army, and they defeated the Romans in 610. This group of them, they allowed this group takes control of Yazdgerd III in 632, and then from 632 onwards, Yazdgerd III is like a puppet of the Persian Empire, controlled by the Arabs. Okay. Then in 644, this is when Yazdgerd III is he escapes. There's an attempt by Yazdgerd III to take control. He has an unsuccessful uprising against the new Arab leaders, the new Arab Empire. He tries to take control, and he fails, and he runs away with his Nestorian sons to Central Asia, where he's given a Nestorian Christian burial. Okay, that's what happens to Yazdgerd III, the last Persian emperor. And Yazdgerd III's daughter is supposed to be given in marriage to Ali's son, but that's before his uprising. So I think that what happens in 644 is, which is probably about the same time that the tome is sent to Pope Martin, about the same time that Omar is dying, about the same time. So 644, around this central period of time, is when Yazdgerd thinks he'll try to rise up and take back control of the Persian Empire and restore his family to the throne. And it probably would have become a Nestorian Christian Persian Empire if Yazdgerd III was successful at that time. Even though maybe he himself was not a strong believer, his sons were, and they gave him a Christian burial in Central Asia. So that's Yazdgerd III, the last Persian emperor. And I think that his sons then become part of the Chinese army or something like that later on, because China had already controlled Central Asia at that time. There was the Tang dynasty, and they controlled Uzbekistan, and they controlled Turkmenistan, all of it, up to the Caspian Sea. China was in control of all of that. So I think Muawiya at this time, that's the son of Abu Sufyan, I think that he was part of the coup, which was attempting to restore Yazdgerd III to power. And I don't think he's got anything to do with the Arab Empire movement yet. I think he's political. I think he is opportunistic. I think he thought that Yazdgerd III has enough fame to be able to restore him to the throne, and he was definitely part of that loyalist group, which is why they say that his father, Abu Sufyan, was the leader of the Qurayshi Arabs. And I think Qurayshi is a reference to sort of Koresh, which is the Persian emperor mentioned in the Bible. Okay, and Qurayshi means, I think, Persian loyalist Arabs. So I think there's a good reason to see Muawiya as related to, therefore, the enemy, the arch enemy of Hani ibn Qabisa. Do you remember who the arch enemy of Hani ibn Qabisa was?
No.
So the arch enemy, we talked about it before, it was Iyas ibn Qabisa. He was the opposite. Yeah, Iyas. So Iyas ibn Qabisa represents the Arabs loyal to the Persian throne, whereas Hani ibn Qabisa represents the Arabs who are wanting independence from the Persian throne and wanting to rule themselves and give them, control their own destiny, right? And they become the origin of the Arabic Empire. So Iyas is part of this Persian loyal group. And I would say that Muawiya comes from that same group. After Iyas has died, his father, Abu Sufyan, is in control of the Persian loyalist group. Abu Sufyan is not necessarily a real person. It's just the name given by the Abbasid narrative to the leader of these Arabs who protected and defended what we call the Kaba Zartosht, right? The Kaba Zartosht. And I've got a picture of a Kaba Zartosht, actually. I'm going to put on the screen so we can understand, what these people are standing for. Hold on.
Okay, sure. And 2 questions while you get that slide up. One is, so Muawiya is not really one of their commanders, or maybe he has a sort of alliance, but he's going to then wait until he has the opportunity to make his move, which he ends up actually doing after a while. So he's not really buddy with them. And the other almost like follow-up question, the year of the Arabs. So symbolizing what actual movement? Is it the actual movement that is going to be the Arabs gaining their independence and building their empire? What is the significance there?
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? I
Yeah.
kind of
So first about
lost
so Muawiya,
concentration while I was opening up this picture. I'm very sorry. Could you repeat,
that
please?
Muawiya
Sorry.
is no. So Muawiya is not buddy with these guys. He is of an opposing faction. His beliefs are very different, and like you said, he's opportunistic. So he is starting to basically prepare himself to go to war against the say the Rashidun guys, as opposed to being part
I
of
agree.
them and then
Yes,
betray them.
exactly.
No, he's
Yeah,
not really friends with them. The other one is
absolutely.
then the
Yeah.
year of the Arabs. Is that then linked to the actual independence, the movement of the
Yes,
Arabs trying to gain their full independence and
absolutely.
starting to build their empire?
Absolutely, yeah. The year of the Arabs is the Battle of the Kar. According to the standard Islamic narrative, I actually accept the date of the Battle of the Kar given in the standard Islamic narrative. I accept that that happened in the 620s, early 620s. I don't see any reason why we should try to redact or revise the date of the Battle of the Kar, as many Orientalist scholars have tried to do. I don't see any reason to do that. There's plenty of other things we need to focus on in the standard Islamic narrative which need revision, but that date I think is solid. I think it's a solid date, and that is the year of the Arabs, and that is the year when the Arabs became independent under the leadership of Hani ibn Qabisa and his prime minister Hanzala. And that happened in the Kar in South Iraq at that time. South Iraq, as Fred Donner also suggests. So that's the year of the Arabs. But Muawiya is he's not part of this movement. He's like an enemy to this movement. And that is also, by the way, standard Islamic narrative. In the standard Islamic narrative, Muawiya and his father are an enemy to this independent Arab movement. They want to protect, and they are in charge of defending and protecting the Kaaba. Now, the Kaaba, this is the picture here we have here, is actually taken. It's a word which comes from the Persian religion, Kaba Zartosht. And here we have some pictures of Kaba Zartosht in different places. There's 3 different pictures across Iran. Kaba Zartosht, a Kaaba, was the original Persian center of religion. There used to be lots of these across the Persian Empire, the Sasanian Empire, I should say at the very least. These were the Sasanian temples. These were the temples of the Sasanian religion. And so when we hear that Abu Sufyan was the leader of the Quraysh and his job and his family's job was to look after the Kaaba, it's if you understand what the Kaaba is, you will understand exactly that they're saying Muawiya and his family were the family loyal to the Sasanian throne, whose job was to impose Sasanian religion upon the Arabs. That's all it's saying. You see the picture? Can you see the picture there? And now I know the text here doesn't match what we're saying. Yeah,
they do look quite a bit like a house, to be fair.
Looks a bit like a house, but it's basically a square box. And they're called Kaba Zartosht. Kaba Zartosht is what they're called. So they were literally the Kaaba. It's just a square box. This is not a house. This is a temple. And so this is not. So you want to Google this Kaba Zartosht and try and find some more examples of Kaba Zartosht so you can satisfy yourselves that this is not just an old stone house. Okay, this is actually the structure of a Persian, a Sasanian Persian religious site. Okay, so that's what it was. Now the text doesn't match this because this is a text from an old slide in a conversation from long ago. I'll just remind the viewers here that these sessions with JC are not anything other than just simply private discussions between me and JC that we thought maybe other people would like to hear in and listen into our discussion. And so we're sharing our private discussion with you because we thought that you might be interested to know what we talk about. And so this is a slide from a presentation I did years ago, and it's relevant in the section of the slideshow where I'm talking about Yazid. But Yazid was the son of Muawiya, so he's also part of the same family. Yazid, son of Muawiya, Muawiya, son of Abu Sufyan. This is the line of the leaders of the Quraysh whose job it was to protect the Kaaba and to promote the religion of the Kaaba to the Arabs, and that's why they're going out. So they are Arabs, but their job as the leaders of the Quraysh, meaning I believe Quraysh loyal Arabs, meaning Persian loyal Arabs, Arabs loyal to the Persian throne. Their job is to protect and promote and support this Kabe-Zardosht religion, a kind of Zoroastrianism. So we must not confuse, just because they have something called the Kaaba, we must not assume that this has got anything to do with Islam. This is not Islam. This is not to do with the Quran. This is not to do with anything except the Zoroastrian religion. Okay, so yeah, these people were not friends of Omar. They were not friends of Ali. They were not friends of Uthman. They were not friends of Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr. They were not friends of Abu Bakr. They were not friends of any of these people. They had their own agenda, their own ways, and I think the Abbasids also come from these people as well. I think the story of the Abbasids being also Quraysh is not to be dismissed. The Abbasids' standard Islamic narrative, when they say of themselves, the Abbasids, that they are from the tribe of Quraysh and that they are related to Muawiya and Abu Sufyan and Yazid and this family, they're saying we are from that group. So Muawiya, who is, I say, one of this Persian throne loyal Arab leaders, is the real sort of source of the Abbasid sort of narrative, which is harking back to Muawiya. They're making a relationship between themselves and Muawiya, but in order to make peace with the other Arabs, they try to make every kind of Arab into a member of that same Qurayshi family. Right? They say in their stories that, Ali was part of this family. And Omar was part of this family. And Uthman was part of this family. And everybody, Muhammad was part of this family. And his family was part of this. They try to make every Arab who is important in the establishment of the Arabic Empire part of their extended Quraysh family, which is absolute, I can't find a polite word, codswallop. Yeah, nonsense. Yeah. It's absolute nonsense. It's just total propaganda. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the Abbasids' claims about themselves being Quraysh. I think that's totally solid. Absolutely solid. That doesn't mean we should ignore the Abbasids' claims that Muawiya and his father and his son were all part of the same Quraysh. That's solid. I think that's solid. And the reason is because of what Yazid did, the son of Muawiya, when he came to power in Western Syria. But Muawiya's rising up and taking control is based on the popularity of Yazdgerd III and the people who are sympathetic to Yazdgerd III. But Yazdgerd III is now gone, and I would say that Muawiya himself was probably a top general, if not the top general, in charge of trying to free Yazdgerd III from the Arabs, and although Yazdgerd III then ran away to Central Asia where he died, Muawiya then continued to be the main mover, the main character representing that Sasanian imperial throne, even though he was of the Arabs. The Arabs had become more powerful than the Persians by this point. And so Muawiya is really representing the opposition. He's representing the last dregs of the Sasanian religion. That's what I say about Muawiya. Is that okay?
Yeah, so is it fair then to see this, to use words that we are familiar with, that we have now another battle of empires, which in a narrative later is all redacted to say, no, they were all the same guys, they were all Muslims when they didn't exist. But we have these Rashidun guys trying to do one thing, and then we have what will become the Umayyads on the other hand. So there is this conflict between the two, and we know that what we would now call the Rashidun guys end up losing, and the Umayyads end up winning. But they are really not friends like the standard Islamic narrative says, and they betray each other. It's like, no, they were just not on the same faction, and that's why they end up fighting. Would that actually be a fair way to look at that part of history?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the key origin of this conflict is the conflict between Iyas ibn Qabisa on one side and Hani ibn Qabisa on the other side. This conflict between these two Qabisas is the origin of all of this. Okay? You're either a Persian loyalist Arab or you're an Arab independent Arab. Yeah, that's where it emerges from.
Right, and still just not trying to jump ahead, but we know that after a bit it's going to be Muawiya who is going to win and start consolidating power. And at one point later, we're going to have Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, he's there actually on the screen, who actually still represents the other faction, and that will be a source for much conflict later as well. But exactly the same thing, seeing, say, Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, just to use the words that that we're familiar with, he would be one Rashidun sort of guy, and the now Umayyad established is Muawiya, and they're going to fight. And again, the Umayyads are going to stay in control. Otherwise, the things would have flipped at that point, right?
Yeah. There is a conflict between Abdullah ibn Zubayr's faction, which is the Bakarid faction, and the Miaphysite Noahide faction. There is a conflict between them, and that conflict emerged first time when what we call the Ridda Wars, when in the standard Islamic narrative they talk about Abu Bakr trying to take control after the death of Muhammad instead of Ali being in control, and this ended up in a lot of rebellions called the Ridda Wars, or the first Fitna, I think they call it. And so this first Fitna is a Fitna between two factions of, basically a Fitna between the Sadducee Karaites on one side, represented by Abu Bakr, and on the other side, the everybody else, essentially. Everybody else, whether they are Muawiya's faction or whether they are the Hani ibn Qabisa's faction, it doesn't matter. Everybody else was against them. That's the first fitna. And then the second fitna is essentially what happens when, again, it's when there is a sort of a conflict between
Abdul Malik and Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr during that time.
I think the second fitna was actually, again, Zubayr. That's right, Abdul Malik. Zubayr's faction again. So the first fitna and the second fitna is associated with the Bakrids trying to assert their authority over everybody. But besides the fitnas, which are the first and second fitnas, beside that, and why are they called fitna? Because these are all part of the same side. And what side is that? That is the side which opposes the Persians, right? So they're all united on one side, but there is a fitna between them. There is a fitna between the Bakr camp and the Ali camp, or the Hani ibn Qabisa camp. But they're all on the same side against the Muawiya camp, which is the Persian camp, right? So there's a bit of complication. You've at least three camps. In general, you've got, the enemy of the enemy of my enemy is my friend camp, which has a conflict between them. There's the Bakr and the Ali group having a conflict between them. On one side, that's called the Rashidun Caliph side. And on the other side, you've got the Persian camp, who are the enemy, led by Muawiya and his family. Abu Sufyan is beforehand. Before Abu Sufyan is going to be obviously Iyas ibn Qabisa, and after Muawiya, you've got Yazid and his conflict with Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr. So you've got these two general camps, but the Rashidun Caliph camp is also divided along certain ethnic lines. Okay, so now we didn't talk about Uthman. I talked about Omar and his religion and his conversion. We talked about Ali and his religion and his conversion. We talked about Muawiya and his religion and the fact he didn't convert. We didn't talk about Uthman. I said I think Uthman may be a name which was invented to cover the period of time where there was actually a Pharisee in control, and that Pharisee is Solomon the Pharisee, who was involved in promoting the tome. And so he would have been a Pharisee and part of the Noahide faction represented by Ali. Uthman was created, perhaps, by the Abbasids to try and make it look like they were fully involved in spreading the Islamic Quran rather than a Pharisee, a Jew who they hated. Perhaps. Nevertheless, at that time of Uthman is when Solomon the Pharisee was definitely supporting and helping Ali, who is Hania bin Qabisa, in Iraq, and they would be probably the ones who sent the tome to the Pope Martin.
Oh yeah, and it is perhaps worth noting, or tell me if I got this wrong, for people watching, that there are independent accounts from outside of the Islamic sources about the existence of Umar and Ali, but there is no record of the person that would be in between. That comes exclusively from the
correct.
Islamic sources, right?
That's absolutely correct when we talk about the name Uthman. But if we talk about the Tajik, then that's not so. There is somebody, and the only sources which talk about this missing person, the only sources which talk about this period, who was the real leader in that period, which is covered by Uthman under the standard Islamic narrative, the only people who talk about it are Chinese sources, the Tang sources, and the name given to the leader at that time is Tajik, the Tajik. We don't really know anything else. So, and the Tajik means a Persian. So if you say, okay, so the Persian was in charge, Persian is Farsi, but Farsi can be Pharisee, and that could be Solomon the Pharisee. So, maybe not. Maybe there was a person called Uthman, and maybe Tajik refers to simply meaning a kind of Persian who was a believer in the religion of the Pharisees.
Right, but when we put like everything together and we see that the Chinese call the person in charge the Persian, and the Leo III writes this letter saying that the book was put together by Umar, Salman the Persian, and
Yes, that's right.
Abu Turab Ali. So
Yes.
it's like we start joining the dots and think,
Yes.
I think Uthman, I can't remember where the name came from. You said Abbasids. I thought he was like the uncle of Abdullah ibn Abdul Malik or somebody like this. Somebody shoehorned.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's a relative of Abdul Malik, according to the standard Islamic narratives. But this could just be all fake, made up stuff. So let's not
to give themselves legitimacy, just like with absolutely everything else that happened.
Yeah, and this is also only according to what the Abbasids say, and the Abbasids are relating everybody to themselves. You have to understand that. So there's no reason to assume this is. Some people out there got absolute lunatic ideas that the Abbasids were not Quraishi or the Abbasids were not associated with Mecca or something. This is absolute lunacy, because the Abbasids are writing about themselves that they are Quraishi, and they're writing about themselves that they are from Mecca in Hijaz, right? So they absolutely loved Mecca in Hijaz, Hijazi Mecca, and they absolutely loved the Quraishi identity. Otherwise, they would have given themselves another identity. Okay, so there's no reason to assume the Abbasids are not exactly who they say they are. But there's plenty of reason to doubt the Abbasids claiming that everybody before them were also related to them. That's that's not necessarily the case. Okay, I have some funny.
So actually, before we move on that, how do you think the empire was, say, divided? Because then we have these two different factions, and it looks like the one that is with Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr later, and then the Abbasids, that happens to be like the southern part of Arabia, and then you have the northern part, which is basically the Rashidun and those who followed them. Sorry, the other way around. The Umayyads being in the north, and then the Rashidun followers still being there in the south until much later they take over. How that would the empire look like, or different empires?
So give me a year and I'll try and describe. So what
Fair enough.
Yeah, because things are moving around. So what kind of year, roughly, period of time would you like me to describe?
Well, I'm thinking about the time when Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr is going to become the conflict. I think, according to the standard Islamic narrative, which I think dates are Yes, basically that he rebels against the Umayyads 2 years before Abdul Malik becomes the actual caliph. So, but we know that with Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, something happens and he's going to start a rebellion. Does that mean that before his time, we could say draw a line in Arabia and say, okay, so from this line south, we still have Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, we have the Rashidun sort of guys, and then north of that line, we have the Umayyad guys. And that's when everything explodes.
Right. Okay. In 683 is the year when Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, as described in this picture, and Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr gets enraged and he starts his rebellion, specifically because of what Yazid does. And this Kaaba Zardosht is the one that Yazid builds over the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is why Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr gets furious, because Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr represents the Karaite Sadducee faction, who were the original ones under Nehemiah ben Hushiel, who had established their Ma'med in Jerusalem in the early 610s. Remember that in the first episode we talked about. So he's like the last of the Nehemiah ben Hushiel's army. He's the last loyalist of that group, and so he's furious about the fact that Yazid has built this Kaaba Zardosht on what is supposed to be, Hebrew sacred ground. He's really furious about that. And that is in 683 when Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr sets up his rival faction. And he does that in Iraq, in Mesopotamia. This is a splinter group. In 682, before he does that, I would say that the whole of the Arabic Empire is already totally consolidated and united under the rule of Yazid and his father Muawiya. That this is solid. This is totally solid. Muawiya is the one who succeeded in consolidating the rule of the Arabs over the empire. He did it by crushing the Messianic Noahide movement led by Ali and his sons. He totally crushed them out of existence, and he did that at Karbala, the Battle of Karbala. That's when he did that. So by the time his son Yazid comes along, Yazid comes to power in 680. Yazid is inheriting essentially a restored Persian Empire, which goes all the way across all the lands that the Persian Empire used to have, and more. It goes to the west, further to the west than the Persian Empire did. It's almost like the same kind of borders which existed during the time of Khosrau II. Yazid has inherited this. So his father, Muawiya, who died in 680, Muawiya has restored all of this empire. Muawiya does this when he has basically usurped power from Ali's son Hassan, who was the last real independent leader of Mesopotamia. All right, so you've got this Mesopotamian Iraq. When I say Mesopotamia, I mean Iraq. Okay, so you've got this Iraqi movement, which starts off with the Battle of the Kar, and then gets taken over by this Bakrid sort of Bakrid group, which Omar represents and Abu Bakr represents, but Omar and Abu Bakr, at least not Abu Bakr, but Omar definitely converts to the religion of the Messianic Noahides, and then the next leader is also part of this Messianic Noahide sort of movement, pushing things in the west. But then along comes Ali, and well, it's not even before Ali comes along. As soon as the person representing the Persian, right? As soon as the Uthman character dies, Muawiya is already in control in the West. He's taken control of the West, and he's planning his revival. So he bases himself in the West. Muawiya bases himself in the West, and that's when does he do that? Muawiya does that in 656. 656. Muawiya takes control and secedes from the Arabic Empire, which has been established by his predecessors. He secedes Syria. He only secedes Syria. He doesn't manage to secede everything. he only manages to secede Syria, but that's all that he needs strategically. All he needs is to secede Syria. His plan was to take Yazdgerd III to Syria and establish him as the emperor over probably the Holy Land, and establish a new movement to retake the Persian Empire. But Yazdgerd III ran away to Central Asia and died there instead. Nevertheless, Muawiya still has his plan to take control of Syria and to recapture Persian Empire. And when the Uthman figure dies in 656, Muawiya takes control and secedes Syria. He actually manages to take Syria and break it away from the rest of the Arabs. Ali and his faction are in control for a short amount of time, for about 5 years. Ali and his people are in control until 661, when Ali is essentially killed by Muawiya, and Muawiya takes control at that time, acknowledging Hassan's authority, allegedly acknowledging Hassan ibn Ali's authority over the empire, but only for a few months. The peace deal was supposed to be that Muawiya acknowledges Hassan, but instead, after a few months, Muawiya takes control and puts himself on the head of the whole empire. So from 661, after deposing Hassan, Muawiya is now in control of Syria and Iraq, the entire Persian Empire. And he consolidates his power from 661. Muawiya consolidates his power until 680. He spends 19 years consolidating his power, and his son Yazid inherits the Persian Empire, restored Persian Empire. And the people who were in power, not so long ago, are okay until Yazid creates the Kaba on the Temple Mount, and that is too much for Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, and they secede Iraq. Iraq secedes at this point in 683. Is that all right?
Right. So Yazid, very bad move to actually do that
Very
and
bad.
upset everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing about Yazid is that if we look at the coins, I don't know if I've got a slide of the coins which I can put on, which is relevant.
You've shown me before. I think they are the ones that look very much Persian, very much Zoroastrian, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Well, what happens with the coins? Well, while Omar and the Persian are in control, as far as we can tell. When Omar is in control, the coins are very much like Byzantine style. They're issued in the Byzantine style. Then, under the time of the rule of the Persian, they seem to have they've abandoned the Byzantine style, and they've adopted the Persian style of coin, and the Byzantine style coin is lost. When Muawiya takes control, he restores a kind of Persian style coin. He starts to a kind of Byzantine style coin, which makes me think that Muawiya was leaning upon support from the Byzantine Empire in order to try and take control of the Persian Empire again. Another interesting thing about Muawiya is that the patriarch.
About Muawiya, it would not have worked for him in any possible way if he was actually in Syria, having enemies to the north and enemies to the south. He would have been in power for about 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
So he would need to have an alliance somewhere in one of the borders. It would make sense for him to ally with the north, as he's actually going to push south and get all of the Arabs under his control.
Absolutely correct, and that's why I don't think there was any sincerity. That Muawiya seems to have some sympathy for Christians. His inscriptions have Christian crosses on the front of them, and I was about to say he was even anointed as king of Jerusalem by the Patriarch of Jerusalem as well. So it's interesting. He wasn't just Caliph, Rashidun Caliph, but he was, according to that fact, the Maronite Chronicle, he was also the rightful king of Jerusalem, according to the Byzantine Church as well at the time. So he was very pragmatic. I think he was a pragmatist, and I have got a picture of the coins here. So I'm going to share that on screen as well. Let's put that back up.
And just thought, as if he did ally to a degree with the Byzantines, did the expansion, I'm actually not very well versed on this part of history at all, but did he continue taking lands from the Byzantines in North Africa and so on? Or do you know if there was anything as well in history that we know he sort of stopped if he allied with them, even if it was for a short period of time? Are you aware of anything of that?
Well, usually they divide it into when we talk about Syria, we talk about Syria and the West, and we talk about Iraq, we talk about Iraq and the East, and they usually sort of divide it in terms of like that. I doubt that's the case. I think that really, when we talk about Syria with Muawiya's people, we should really only be talking about Syria. We shouldn't think about Egypt and all the rest of it as well. We should consider that Egypt and all the rest of it was still under Iraq. So really, it's a kind of a northern faction which comes in very strategic location and manages to take control of Iraq, because whoever takes the throne of Iraq has taken the throne of the whole empire. So I think that's. Did I catch your meaning? Have I addressed that?
Yes, so it is actually two different factions. So even if you have in Syria Muawiya, and he's now friends with the Byzantines, the ones still taking lands from the Byzantines, it wouldn't be him. His fight is going to be against the Arabs. The Arabs are still expanding and doing their own things. We are talking about two different empires. It's just kind of like complicated when we think about the standard Islamic narrative, and we've been told for so long they were all the same, and we know it's not the case. And to now think about it as two opposing factions right there in those lands, and they have their own agendas, their own needs for conquest, and it's kind of difficult to really get that in my head. But yeah, I can sort of imagine this group of Arabs that are still doing their things, probably taking lands from the Byzantines, but Muawiya appears there in Syria saying, hey, no, we're going to be friends. Actually, we're going to stop these guys because we don't like them either. Perhaps something along those lines.
Yeah, if you understand if you study the sort of conflicts which take place between the Franks and the Byzantines, the Greeks, and under the in the United Church times, okay, before the Great Schism of East and West, right? Studying the Franks, you'll realize that there's a lot of war. There are a lot of wars going on in Christian Europe, in the Roman Church, between Western Romans and Eastern Romans. There's a lot of war going on between them, but they're all united as one happy Holy Roman Empire, right? So the Franks are, and this is before, actually I should say before, it's not the Holy Roman Empire of the Carolingians, it's the Holy Roman Empire prior to the Carolingians, in other words, the Holy Byzantine Empire. So the Franks were officially a sort of a subordinate people to the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, but they were still at war. You know, there's a lot of bribing going on along. There was a lot of taking of tribute and paying tribute and going back and forth, a lot of territorial swaps, and that's all in one happy family, one happy Roman Christian family. When you understand that relationship between the Franks and the Byzantines, the relationship between the Franks and Muawiya was extremely affectionate. It was really, really, close kin, all right? So there's no reason, except racism, to be honest, ethnic boundaries, and well, these were Arabs, they weren't Romans. There's no reason to look at Muawiya as like an outsider to the Byzantine cause. He appears, of course, Byzantine Empire was extremely weakened at that point. They couldn't afford to bring Muawiya into line and to toe the line. They couldn't make him toe the line if they tried, because they were very, very weakened at that time. They had enough trouble trying to keep the Franks peaceful. And that's why they focused on, arresting Pope Martin and trying to enforce their position over the Western Christians of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Roman Empire. And they were just happy enough to have a pragmatic opportunist like Muawiya in power, who was happy to be crowned as the king of Jerusalem under the Byzantine Empire by a Byzantine patriarch, and happy to have him put to use their kind of Byzantine crosses and to have the Tau cross on his coins. They were happy to have him, as basically an ally, and they were not that worried about him. There's no reason to assume that he was anyway an enemy to the Byzantines when you understand the relationship between the Byzantines and the Franks. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that alliance, I mean, it worked out so very well in the long run.
Yeah, it did. Muawiya was I would honestly say, he was not from some politically naive background. He was from a politically savvy family who had made close ties with the Sasanian throne, and they knew exactly how to manipulate and push one side or the other, and eventually rise their way up the ranks to be able to take advantage of every opportunity they had and put themselves in a strong position of power. And when he was strong enough, he could break ties with the Byzantine Empire, and he didn't have to worry about them anymore because the Byzantines simply didn't have the strength to resist him. But the Byzantines weren't going to resist him until, and that's why they had this, I think it's called the Henoticon. Let me check the name of what it's called, because it's very important to understand this. That you can't study any of this without understanding what's going on theologically in the Byzantine Empire at the same time. Let me just check. I think it's called the Henoticon, or it might be called the Ekthesis. Now, the Henoticon is the earlier attempt to unite with the Monophysites. That was under Justin's time. It's the Ekthesis. The Ekthesis, okay? So the Byzantines were pushing the Ekthesis so that there would be no conflict with Muawiya. The Ekthesis was a heresy where they said, we're not going to discuss the nature of Jesus. We're not going to talk about how much of him was divine, how much of him was human, whether he was fully divine, whether he was fully human. We're not going to talk about that. That's completely outlawed in our empire at this time. And I think the Ekthesis is really to try and make peace with these Arabs on their border in Syria, because they cannot afford another war. They've got too much going on. They've got the Avars in the north. They've got the Bulgarians now are coming down as well. They've got the Franks coming. They've got a lot of stuff going on in the north, and they cannot afford also. It's exactly the same situation. If Muawiya didn't have friends with Byzantines, he would have lasted 5 minutes because he would have been crushed from the north and the south. But the Byzantines are also in exactly the same position as Muawiya. They can't afford to be on the war in every front. They have the problem with the Avars and the Bulgars in the north. They have the problem with the Franks in the west, and they can't afford to have problems with Muawiya in the south as well. They simply can't afford it. So they have to make peace somewhere, and so they make peace with Muawiya through the Ekthesis. The Ekthesis was already in power before Muawiya, but it works very well because it means we're not going to have a fight with these other kinds of Christians to our south who are who are maybe only have a quibble with us over the nature of Jesus. We don't want to have a big fight with them. In fact, we need to start getting some kind of Christian unity going on here in the 7th century. Otherwise, the Christian empire is going to collapse entirely. So let's just not talk about the nature of Jesus. We all consider that Jesus is the Messiah. That's good enough. Let's leave it at that. And that's called the Ekthesis, which is a heresy in the church at that time. So anyway, the point is, Muawiya resists and secedes Syria, no doubt with Byzantine support, and he restores these coins. That's why I've got the picture of them on the screen right now. This is a Byzantine style coin. Okay. Now, just prior to Muawiya, the Arab Empire had stopped using Byzantine-style coins, and they were using Persian-style coins all across the whole empire. Okay? So Omar comes along, and he's using Byzantine-style coins. I got some pictures of those too. Just remove that quickly. I'll get a picture of an Omar-style coin.
Okay, as you find those, I'll ask another question. So it will be much later on when Abdul Malik removes images and creates the first coin, which has just Arabic written on it.
Much later.
Do you know if that would be as part of him taking any sort of sides on the whole iconoclasm conflict that the church were having those discussions, or something completely independent he decides to do? Do you know how that would become?
Iconoclasm pops up when one group of religious leaders wants to prove their loyalty and authenticity over another group of religious leaders. So the iconoclasm was started by Abdul Malik, but then was taken up by the Byzantine emperors pretty quickly after that as well. So, it was basically a kind of one-upmanship. And the reason why Abdul Malik does that is because at the Sixth Ecumenical Council, the Byzantines have simply just outlawed the Henoticon, outlawed monothelitism, which is Abdul Malik's position, probably outlawed monoenergism, which is the position written in the Islamic Quran. And so they've basically said, you're a bunch of heretics to all of these leaders on their southern borders. You're all a bunch of heretics. And that is why Abdul Malik basically makes a very clever move by saying, okay, let's remove all images. And they call us heretics, but look at how their images are all over the place. So it's basically a step of trying to say what we call holier than thou. So Abdul Malik's position by removing images from the coins, he's basically saying to the Byzantines, we are holier than thou. That's the position. He's taking a holier than thou attitude. And the response from the Byzantines is to try and go one-upmanship against Abdul Malik's iconoclasm, and they become even more iconoclastic in response and say, no, we are holier than thou. So you kind of get a bit of a back and forth, a battle going on between the Byzantines and the Arabs over this iconoclasm to see which side is the most iconoclastic until along comes something called the Seventh Ecumenical Council. It's really, as I said, you cannot understand anything that's going on unless you study the theology of what's going on in Byzantine Empire. Anyway, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which was in getting the date 787 AD, 787, well into the Abbasid era, when the Seventh Ecumenical Council basically outlaws iconoclasm and says, no, pictures are fine. And by the way, this is the last and final ecumenical council for the Orthodox Church. We're completing it now. We're not going to have any more councils. We've clarified our religious position, and this is it. So you can say that Orthodox Christianity was not finalized until the year 787, and then it became Orthodox Christianity. So it's really impossible to look back beyond the year 787 and talk about Orthodox Christianity. It did not exist before the year 787 AD. All right. But between the Sixth Ecumenical Council, which was in the 680s, and the Seventh Ecumenical Council in the 780s, 100 years, there was a one-upmanship between the Byzantines and the Arabs, trying to say, we are more holy than you, and we are more iconoclastic than you. So, in a certain extent, it's the Byzantines' fault for pushing Islam into its extreme form of, reviling images, which is still present in Islam until this present day.
So, well, a couple of thoughts. One is that all of this actually makes, Game of Thrones look like child's play by comparison. It's just very incredible. But just a very random thought as well. It has pretty much nothing to do with this, but it's one or a series of hadiths which have always bothered me, and it's the fact that the story about images being haram is associated in their hadiths with Jibril saying that to Muhammad, but also, and this is the odd one out, about the dogs, saying that an angel doesn't walk into a house if there are images, or a dog. It's like, why the dog? So do you have any thoughts about that? And just what you say, yes, this is what has popped into my head. I know that there was a pope later who actually, I think he said that cats were evil or something of the sort, and they started just killing all of the cats in the empire, which actually then led to the plague because rats and stuff. So I just wonder if you have anything solid about this whole thing about the dog, or it could have been a much later invention as a one-upmanship, like you just said. So that guy says cats are bad, so we're saying dogs are bad, or anything of the sort, just to see if there's any link there.
Yes, that's well, I don't know. I haven't got any specific thing on that. Sorry about that. One thing I should just say, somebody in the chat just pointed out here when I was saying the ekthesis, one of the people who are watching this right now, HIM, corrected me. It's the typus. That's correct, and I put a link up for the typus in the chat there, so you can understand what was actually the position of the church at that time during the conflict with Muawiya and trying to have a peace with Muawiya at that time. So I'm sorry, I don't know about the dog situation. Maybe that's worth investigating if you want to go into that. But I think I've got to. This is generally this kind of area, this period. I could honestly say that after the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which is 787, I've lost interest in the whole thing. So I don't really have any interest beyond 787 and how it's developing. I've already got all my answers. I'm happy. I'm satisfied that I know how the thing is developing, and I didn't bother trying to follow anything beyond that.
These are not say areas of my research. I used to actually look more at hadiths and sirah and things like that. And now, no, I'm actually going back to basically the origins of the whole thing. It's just one of those, points of curiosity that I always wonder. Well, we know that Abdul Malik is the one that removes images, so it's something to do with him. But when we look at the story from Islam, it's like, oh no, it's the angel, and it's because of images and a dog, and it just always stood out. But it's not something that I would spend any time at all trying to research, as it doesn't move anything. But I just thought, in case that you had a thought, and it's the whole thing with the Pope saying that the cats are bad. I don't know. I like cats and dogs. What can I say? I'm not
if I try and come up with something on the spot now, which I can, there is the representation of Saint Christopher in the Byzantine Orthodox Church as a dog. They give him a dog head. A lot of the time when they depict Saint Christopher, they depict him as a dog. So sometimes you'll see in some places an icon of a dog, and you'll think, what is this saint dog? Who's this saint dog? What's going on here? And that was Saint Christopher, who is associated with the Jordan River and is associated with the Canaanites, the people of Canaan, which is the people of the Jordan River Valley. So perhaps it was... I don't know. Perhaps it was because in Greek, of course, Canaan sounds like Canaan, which is Canaan is like the canine, which is where we get the name for dogs from. Canine people comes from Greek word, so they associated Canaan in Greek with the dogs, and so they put the pictures of the dog and the saintly halo around them, and this would be basically holy dogs, if you like, or holy saints of Canaan, and Saint Christopher is one of them. And I don't know, maybe there was a fear of these Canaanites because of this, and so it started off as a fear of Canaanites, and then maybe a fear of Kenites as well. It's also to do with that. By the way, we also get the English word kennel from the same root, and maybe as is the general case in Islam, as people became less and less familiar with the symbolism, they tried to find a more base interpretation of these things, and so the dog became like a bad thing amongst them, which has begun to spread in Judaism and other things since then. Because there was a time when a dog in Judaism was not a bad thing. You have two types of dog in the first century Jewish writings in Koine Greek, what we call Judeo-Greek. They have Kinarion, and they have I think it's what's the other one? Is it Kinos and Kinarion? And one of them is I can't remember off the top of my head. I have to check the source. It'll take a while to open up. But one of them is meaning pet dogs, and the other is meaning wild dogs. And wild dogs were always scary. I don't know if you know that wild dogs are, even today in the modern world, are responsible for huge numbers of deaths of humans across the planet. Huge numbers. I think even the only thing which beats them really is road traffic accidents. But wild dogs are still the most dangerous threat to humans when it comes to the wildlife. More than bears or anything else, more than wolves, wild dogs are the problem. So wild dogs have always been a negative thing, but pet puppies, pet dogs, family dogs has always been a very positive thing. And if we take the example proof from the Bible, the name of Joshua and Caleb were the two two of the spies who went into the land of Canaan and spied it out. And when the spies came back, they gave a report to Moses and the Israelites in the desert. They were all giving terrified reports of the Canaanites, except for Joshua and Caleb, who said, "No problem, we can take them. God's on our side." And Caleb means dog. So it was only Joshua and Caleb who were allowed to enter into the Holy Land, the Promised Land, because all the other spies were so cowardly. But God said, well, none of your generation is going to enter the Promised Land then, except Caleb and Joshua. And so Caleb, which means dog, his name means dog, gets this special honor. And you can't say that they were calling him dog because dog was a dirty name or a bad thing or an unpleasant thing at that time. Clearly, they were calling him dog because it was something very special at that time. And he gets this special honor right next to Joshua. And Joshua symbolizes the Messiah, and Caleb symbolizes the followers of the Messiah, you see, in this position. So dog had a very good meaning until the Arabs got scared of dogs somewhere along the line and started presenting them as a bad thing. And then, of course, medieval Spanish Jews or what we call Sephardic Jews who were in the Arab Empire, such as Maimonides, they start to spread the negative view on dogs in Judaism as well. But until that time, dogs were not a bad thing. So can't really help you on that. That's just on the top of my head in response to your question concerning dogs. Maybe something there is worth following a thread to find out.
It's actually very, very good. You've come up with that like off the cuff. That's very well done. It's possible, or quite likely actually, that first it had a metaphorical meaning and then it became a literal meaning. There are other examples within their traditions where something used to mean something very vague and then it becomes like, no, it's exactly that, very, very physical. So it has happened before. But anyway, I just thought I would throw it out there because it's just an interesting point because of the hadith, which we cannot trust anyway. But the interesting thing is particularly with the iconoclasm, because I always thought that it was maybe Abdul Malik who was trying to do better than the Byzantines, but rather him copying from the Byzantines as opposed to the Byzantines copying from Abdul Malik. But yeah, that's very good.
Yeah. So back to the coins, I suppose. So this was the coin where in the time of Omar or Uthman, where they have a Byzantine style coin where they've got this picture of, it is Jesus holding the cross there, because in saints and Christian art and iconography, they always make the symbol of, you can always tell the symbol of the saint or the person in the picture based on what they are holding. For example, if he's holding an upside down cross, it's Saint Peter. If he's holding some draping skin, it's Saint Bartholomew. If he's holding a sword, it's Saint James. If he's holding a hacksaw, it's another saint, etc., etc., etc. Depending on what they're holding, you don't have to write the name of the person down. You know who they are based on what they're holding. So here we have a Byzantine depiction of Jesus holding the cross, and he has a cross on the mountain behind him. Probably that's the sorry, what's it called? What's that mountain? Calvary. On the way to, they talk about the way to Calvary. The mountain Calvary behind him. He's got the cross on the mountain behind him. He's holding a cross in his hand, and it's written down the side Rasul, and on the other side of the coin it says Muhammad, Rasul Muhammad. So this means the messenger Muhammad. And this is a reference to Jesus, obviously, at the time of Omar and Uthman. So that's one kind of coin. And then I have to come out of this one. Then we have, after that, we have these coins, Zubayrid coins, which are Persian-style coins. And we also have these coins, which are after the Omar coin. So this kind of coin is spread across, it has Bismillah written on it in Arabic there, but it's a Persian style coin. And so these Persian style coins come after the initial use of Byzantine style coins in the time of Omar. And then the whole empire is using these coins during the time of the Persian, maybe that's Solomon the Persian or Uthman. That Uthman period, all the people are using these coins. Now, interestingly enough, at that time, the emperor on the coin saying Bismillah is Yazdgerd III, which was what I mentioned earlier, that the Arabs had captured Yazdgerd III and were using him as a puppet. Perhaps even when we talk about the Persian and being referenced in Chinese sources, the Persian could even be a reference to Yazdgerd III, but he was a puppet on the throne who was under the complete control of the Arabs at that time, and they had their Bismillah coins. Anyway, for some reason, Yazdgerd's role in the Abbasid narrative is completely obliterated, and we don't really hear much about him. You have to gather information about him from numismatic evidence, from Byzantine evidence, from Chinese evidence, from Central Asian evidence, and you don't really have much to go on from the Abbasid sources. So he's been obliterated, but it could be simply that they had him as a sort of representative, but he was a very reluctant puppet on the throne for them, and he had to run away from them. As I said, Muawiya helps him escape after the death of this during the reign of this maybe Uthman character. Yazdgerd escapes. Now the odd thing is, listen to this is really interesting. Yazdgerd III is dead, and yet the Arabs in control of the empire are still issuing coins saying Yazdgerd and pretending he's alive until Muawiya takes control. That's interesting. That's really, really fascinating. So Yazdgerd's dead and buried in Central Asia, and yet the Arab coins are still issuing coins saying Yazdgerd on them, as if he's still alive. I think that this is because they needed to, their consolidation of the Persian Empire was dependent upon pretending that he was still alive. If you think about it, remember, I don't know if you remember that in the times of Deng Xiaoping. I have to be careful. I don't want to offend any Chinese communists watching here, but if you remember, Deng Xiaoping once upon a time was so old it looked like they were literally wheeling him out on like a wheeling trolley. Maybe he was like just a stuffed version of Deng Xiaoping in the waving position. But he may have been dead a long time ago. But they needed to keep him alive because they had a power vacuum and they needed to sort out what was going on. And it was the same with some of the Soviet leaders as well. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, but I'm going to really try very, very hard to not make a joke about Joe Biden right now.
Right.
But there is an actual precedent as well in the
Yes.
Iberian Peninsula. I don't know if it is myth or history about the Zid, who was apparently a very powerful commander, and even after his death, they just mounted him on a horse, and basically they make him lead the charge, and basically the enemies just melted. Don't know if it's true or not, but there are stories that
there are examples.
These things did happen. Yeah.
These things did happen. They did have. There are plenty of. If you start looking through history, you'll find there are plenty of examples of when the leader is already dead, but for the sake of morale or to keep the empire together, or for some reasons best known to them, to stop a power vacuum, sort of causing a civil war, they pretend that the person is still alive until they've sorted out the mess. And that's exactly what happened at this time during the span of Uthman. The reason that it's like, well, we have these coins in the time of Omar, we have these coins in the time of Muawiya, and we have kind of coins in the time of Uthman, but the coins have got the name Yazdgerd on, even after Yazdgerd is dead. But they are Arab coins because they have Bismillah on them. So we're kind of in a weird situation, and we don't really know what was happening during Uthman's time, but we do know that Yazdgerd was already dead by that time, and it looks like Muawiya is the one who fills that power vacuum. He starts to take control in Syria, and Ali is still in control in the south, in Iraq, but not for long.
Okay. It's still actually just with the coins, because you said it is the Bismillah, but this is a long time before Islam is actually a thing. So
correct.
When they wrote this Bismillah, what did they actually mean by it?
By the name of the divine. See, Allah is a Judeo-Arabic, we call it euphemism. You know that I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I can't say the name of God the way that you could say it, or that other Christians say the name of God. There are plenty of names of God. There are many names of God. For example, one of the names of God, which is spelt like with a Y and an H, and I can't say the rest because I'm prohibited from doing that. In order to refer to that, euphemistically, I would say Yod K Vav K, and that's a way I can refer to it. There's no K in this name, but I have to say K in order to protect the pronunciation of the name. So I say Yod K Vav K. And another name of God, which we protect when we say Elohim with a K instead of an H, because we want to protect that name. I can't say the name as it is, Elohim. You could probably, I can't. Then we have many examples of these names. For example, another one, Kale, we would say Kale, which is actually written in English as E-L, but we don't pronounce that. We say Kale instead. So we kind of protect the name with these different ways. Now, in Arabic, the name for God is, as in the God, is, if we say, I could say Kale Elohim or Kale Eloach of Israel. If I say Kale Eloach, which is a protected version of saying the Hebrew name, that name in Arabic is exactly the same. There's no difference in saying it in Arabic. So you also have to find a way of writing it euphemistically so that it doesn't cause blasphemy, according to the rabbinical Jewish interpretation of things. So Allah is simply a euphemism. That means it's very difficult to say because I can't
But what I mean is, so for these people, when they create these coins, and they mean God, is the God of Judaism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism,
the fact that it's a euphemistic, the fact that it's a you know that the Sadducees and the Karaites do not have a prohibition against pronouncing this name. Okay, so the fact that it's written euphemistically is proof that it's coming from a Pharisaical Judaic position. So they're saying by the name of the divine is what they're saying.
Okay, and this is obviously not within my area of knowledge about the Bismillah, which is Bismillah instead of Bismillah. Is that actually kind of like what you are getting at? That it would be
that's what I'm getting at.
Bismillah.
This actually says Bismillah Allah. Bism Allah is what's written on that. Bism Allah is what's written, and Allah is a euphemistic way of saying the name, because if I say it, it sounds too close to Hebrew that I can't pronounce it even in Arabic. Okay,
right.
I would probably do it as a one-to-one with you in private conversation, but I noticed that there were 16 people watching just now, and so I'm not going to say that right now.
Yeah, I understand, but it is certainly yes, because these coins are sort of Zoroastrian, or basically from that region, that these people are still, say, from the Jewish faith, as opposed to being Zoroastrians, and to them Allah means, the God of, I don't know, I can't remember, Zoroaster or whatever it is.
Yeah, this is definitely the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but there's no problem with having a Zoroastrian symbolism because we're talking about Noahide Judaism. And Noahide Judaism is the universal side of Judaism, which welcomes all faiths. So there's nothing wrong with having your Zoroastrian coin as long as you're, tipping your hat to the God of all creation, to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you're just like saying, acknowledging you. So you are not, you're showing that you're not, that this is not an idol, that you're making, you're not making an idol. You are you're doing what's called nullifying the idol by writing, and by the way, I acknowledge the God of all creation by the name of God. So I'm not doing this against God. I'm doing this with God's name. I'm doing this in harmony with God's name. So there's no problem.
You're saying that these coins, they don't actually read Bism Illah. It's Bism. Well, Allah is. Never mind. I didn't say anything.
Yeah, because the Aleph can be pronounced either way. This is a very simply the B, the S, the M, the Aleph, the Lamed, and the H. Yeah, that's all there is written on the side there. They have some Pahlavi writing on the inside as well. I don't know which coin this one is, but I think this is, because I've just pulled it up. I think this might, based on the position in the presentation, because it's an old presentation and I have to revise what's going on here. Based on the location of it in the presentation, I think this is the Yazdgerd coin, based on its location in the presentation. Okay, so that probably is written in Pahlavi there as Yazdgerd's.
Okay.
name.
What I was thinking about before, actually, and I got a little bit confused. It was not really about Bismillah. Sorry, I got confused with it. It was about Alhamdulillah, with li
Yes.
being translated as two, but then la means is the
La,
name.
yes, there's no aleph. That's right. It's another example because you can't write the word. As I said, the word. I can say this because it's not as sacred as Yod-K, but the spelling of this word in Arabic and Hebrew is the same, and it's the word for God in Semitic languages. A very basic word for God in Semitic languages is an aleph and a lamed and a hey. Okay, so that's what's written there. But you can't write that basic word for God because that would be blasphemy. So you have to omit one of the letters and leave the rest. We do this the same in plenty of Jewish writings where you'll see at the beginning of a letter, it'll say something like Bezrat, and then it'll have the two letters from the name of God. And it won't have all the letters. It'll just have two letters, and you know what we mean. It means with the help of God before we start to write a letter. Yeah. And so this is the same sort of thing.
With Alhamdulillah, do you think that that's actually what it always meant, or could it have been, say, Alhamdu, and then Lillah having been Illa, and then they just changed that to say no, because we cannot say it, so that that Aleph actually stands, or actually Lam stands for Li, as opposed to being ill.
Okay, because this is an interesting discussion.
Do you think
this
that
is a
it could have been
discussion
something there, or it was always just saying?
Okay, so this discussion really is on this prayer, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. When in this prayer, it really doesn't make sense when you're saying Alhamdulillahi Rabbil, because you should say Ya Allahumma. That's the correct grammar. So it doesn't make any grammatical sense to say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Malik Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. You can't say, you're talking to somebody when you say Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, you're talking directly to the person. Okay? But when you start off the prayer with Alhamdulillahi, you're talking about the person. And when did it stop being about the person and start turning into to the person? There's no transition. There's no transition in it. It should have been Ya Allahumma. Alhamdulillah for something like that. For example, all thanks is to you, or Alhamdulillah. Something, it should be like this. But instead, it's Alhamdulillah. It's like to him. And then it starts saying Iyaka to you. It's like, well, what are you doing here? Where's your grammar going? It doesn't make any sense. So I think that's where your question is coming from. So what's good? Right. So we have to find an explanation for this, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, even their prayer is something else. It used to say something, it used to mean something, and then the whole thing got edited. Even the most basic prayers that they say to this day. It's all a mess.
But it doesn't make any grammatical sense. Exactly. So, okay. So my explanation for this is it's not part of the prayer. It's the title. It says like this: the praise for God is, and there is no need to express the verb to be in Arabic. You don't have to say it is this. You just say the praise for God, and it's implied is, and then you say Rabb al-Alamin al-Rahman al-Rahim Malik Yawmiddin Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. So that's the prayer. It starts, Lord of all creation, Master of the Day of Judgment. You it is we worship, and you it is we look to help. This prayer is beginning after you've given the title of what it is. So Alhamdulillah is not actually part of the prayer. It just means the thanksgiving to God is, and then you give the prayer. So that means that the lamed, sorry, not the lamed, the la and the hey, sorry for using the Hebrew term, the la hey for the word, the name God in this title is still written euphemistically, because if you put the aleph in there, then you've blasphemed according to Pharisaical laws. But that means that you actually consider what the scribes and the Pharisees say as valid. You know, that means you have to be from a school that respects the scribes and the Pharisees, and you're not from the Sadducee school, you see? And you're not from the Sadducee or the Karaite school.
Yeah, basically they really didn't get anything right. At what point do you think the meaning of, for example, these things changed from what it originally was into what it now is? Do you think that that's actually just the Abbasids creating their own narrative, or could it have been before that during Abdul Malik and
Well, if something is
consolidation of
too
power?
if something is too widespread, if something is too popular and too widespread, you can't do anything about it except change the narrative around it. You can't edit it now. You can't change its wording. Everybody knows it. So all you can do is like maybe put a comma here, a speech mark there, or something like that, and say, "Oh, you've misquoted it. It has a speech mark here and there," because you can't get rid of the fact that the word is out there and everybody's heard it all the time. So when something has become too popular, there's very little you can do about it, and that's why even to this very day, Muslims are standing up, 5 times a day saying Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and they think that the word Alhamdulillah is equivalent to Ya Allahumma, which is not. It's just not. But again, they also think that Inna yakun lahu walid means he doesn't have a son, when it literally word for word means indeed he has a son. You know what I mean? All you have to do is change the narrative around the sentence. The sentence is already too well known. You can't change the sentence. It's written everywhere. Everybody's saying this. You can't do anything about it. All you can try to do is control the narrative surrounding it.
Right, it's equivalent of look at this, and it doesn't say what it is written. It says what I tell you. It says,
Correct.
contrary to what you can actually see with your own eyes.
And this happens all the time. Look at the word socialism. You see the title on this channel is like proto-socialism. Well, what's a socialism? It's the root word. So it means what it says. Social. Are you a social person? Are you interested in social activities and social meaning? Are you social? Yes. I mean, I don't think there's very few people who watch this channel. There are very few people who in comparison to the population of the people on the planet, a small percentage of people on the planet are not social, right? So we are all socialists in that sense, right? But despite the fact that it's written in front of the English speaker's eyes for everybody with a brain to see what it means, nevertheless, you got vast numbers, I would say probably the majority of the English speakers of the population of the world today, would say, I'm not a socialist. It's like, why on earth not? What on earth is stopping you from being a socialist? I mean, you seem pretty social to me. You seem to be along, tuned to the idea that we should look after each other, we should be a good society, we should help each other, and we should be friendly to each other. We shouldn't just ignore people dying on the street. We are social people, so there we are socialist. But then people will say, "Oh, but I'm not a socialist." Why? Because they've changed the narrative surrounding the word social. They changed they couldn't change the popularity of the word socialist, so they changed the narrative around it and say, "Oh, if you're a socialist, you stand for A, B, C, D, E, F, G." All these issues are like, no, absolute rubbish. Absolute some kind of, you know what I mean? And that's so we have a perfect example in English language. If you think to yourself for a moment, "Oh, that's not realistic. That's not possible. How could they change the meaning of, inna yakunduhu walid or alhamdulillahi? How could they change the meaning from what it literally says unless it meant what we understand it to mean today?" And the example which I give you is the word socialism there. Right there.
Yeah, it's a very good example. It's the equivalent of when, if you have, say, a dictionary, English dictionary from 100 years ago, and there is a particular word and it has a meaning, and now you look at that word now and it has that meaning, and it has another meaning, and maybe the other meaning, the newer one, has been now is the number one because the word is now used in that manner, even though the root was different. And we have lots and lots of words like that. So yeah, it's a very, very good example. And I think that's probably one of the things that I really enjoy about the translation from Saint Murad, that he has done his very best to go back to what the words actually meant back then, not what they mean now. After 1400 years of people reciting the Quran, the words, they have, say, a different meaning, some of them, because they are in the Quran, but back then they meant something else. And sometimes it's an eye opener when you see some of his words translated in a way that really contradict whatever the verse is being explained as today. So that's actually very, very good.
Yep. So there we go. That's how the meaning of Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, and things like that, how things like that change as they go along. So we got the coins there, and I was going to show. So we went through that coin. I should put it back on the screen again, just to get us back on track of our original conversation. We went through that coin, and then we came to that coin from a Byzantine style, which then vanishes off the face of the planet for a few decades, and we only have these Persian style coins. And then after the Persian style coins, we suddenly find ourselves back with the Yazdgerd coins, which are with the Muawiya's coins, which were Byzantine style, indicating that he had an alliance with the Byzantines. But then by the time his son comes along, Yazid has abolished all of the Byzantine style coins, and he's also abolished Bismillah from the Persian style coins. And instead he puts up Persian coins with this is Muawiyah's coins here, where you've got a Byzantine style. But when Yazid comes to power, there you go, that's Yazid's coin. This is what Yazid is doing. And what Yazid has here is no Bismillah, no Arabic, no Bismillah. It's a totally Persian coin. Yazid has come to power in 680, and it's a totally 100% total Persian coin. And his empire is a Persian empire. There's no more even attempt to placate Christians with Tau crosses. There's no attempt to placate Muslims with Bismillahs. It's just screw you, everybody who isn't a Persian Zoroastrian. I'm going to go full on Zoroastrianism from now on. This is my religion, and this is what you're all going to accept. And that's why there was a revolution. Not only that, but I also showed you earlier, he also built the Kaba on the Temple Mount. Well, that was too much for the Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr to take. He couldn't accept that.
Yeah, maybe he didn't have very good advisors because it didn't really work out too well for him.
Certainly not. I think also his name Yazid it means God in Persian. It doesn't have the same meaning in Arabic, but since he is completely in Persian, I'm thinking Yazid is actually presenting himself as a god king. He's trying to present himself as a god king.
There was a common thing in Persia, right? That their god is meant to be the ruler. The ruler is
God,
not a representative of God. He is God in the world. Yeah,
that's exactly correct.
So then, of course, and that would then really upset absolutely everybody from not just his lands, but everybody. And then he's in power for 2 years.
Yeah, he doesn't last long. That's right.
Do you know if there are any coins between him and Abdul Malik? Because I have seen his coins and Abdul Malik's, but I haven't seen anything in between.
I don't think so, because they were very short reigns. You had Muawiya II, who came in for like 5 minutes, and then he was gone. And then he was replaced by Marwan, who was a Maronite. Maron is Maronite. Maron, the Marwan name means Maron. It's literally a Maronite name. So he was some kind of what we call a monothelite who was in charge at that time. Very short time, and then he dies, and his son Abdul Malik ibn Marwan comes and takes control. But first of all, before we get to that, we have to follow the line of what's going on. So clearly Yazdgerd upsets everybody. It's not Yazdgerd, Yazid the First clearly upsets everybody. It's got this kind of I am the god condition, and he has this temple on the Temple Mount. He builds the Kaba, and this is over the black stone. Remember the black stone, which we talked about it, the Beth El stone, the stone which the Karaites and the Sadducees think is extremely important, but is not important in Pharisaical Judaism. It's an idol in Pharisaical Judaism. It was not originally an idol, but it became used as an idol, and so we don't consider it important anymore. But the Sadducees and the Karaites think it's very important. Well, that is actually underneath this, the Temple Mount. That's actually where it was stored. Let me find a picture of.
so that is actually Yazid. So around the year 680, he is or thereabouts, and he's going to build this in Jerusalem. What had happened? Where was the stone before? Was it actually always there in Jerusalem?
Well, it had moved around. It has a history. It moved around a bit. There's a picture of it there. People said that this had disappeared, and whoever knew where this was, they were going to have a lot of power over a lot of Hebrews, because this was an important stone. This is the stone that Jacob slept on and had the vision of heaven, and he called it Bethel. He anointed the stone, and he called it. This happened in Bethel. It's called the Bethel stone, there was supposed to be some kind of prophetic power on this. If you slept with your head on this stone, you were supposed to be able to have prophetic visions and power. So whoever had that stone would be considered to have sort of access to supernatural knowledge and things like that. It was a very important stone. It became important in the Edomian religion. The Elijahblites started their religion off. So let me show you. This is is it here? This is a picture of the inside of the Dome of the Rock. This is the rock itself of the dome. When we talk about the Dome of the Rock, this is the rock itself, and underneath this rock is a cave, and inside of that cave is where part of the Bethel stone still exists today. It still exists today. It's not important, as I say, for scribes and Pharisees, but it's important for Sadducees and Karaites. Only part of the stone exists today, but that's where it was kept. It was kept. It seems to me that it was the Nehemiah ben Hushiel's army who brought it back there, because Nehemiah ben Hushiel and his army, they were Sadducees and Karaites, and they must be the ones who brought it back there and placed it underneath there for their authority to start sacrifices on the Temple Mount again. And Omar, no doubt, also was involved in starting. We have references to in the early days of his reign, sacrifices being started again on the Temple Mount. Even in the standard Islamic narrative, they talk about Omar consulting with a Jew concerning where exactly they should build the shrine on the Temple Mount. And so this was an important place for the scribes, not for the scribes, right, for the Sadducees and the Karaites. The stone had been placed under this rock, and it was important for them. But then suddenly, we have Yazid building his Kabe Zartosht on top of it. Well, that's like blasphemy of blasphemies, and it's too much for them to accept. They simply can't take that, so they have to get rid of it. And that's where this story of Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr burning down the Kaaba and kidnapping the stone and taking the stone to the east. That's where it all comes from. That's exactly what happened when Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr did that against Yazdgerd. And that happens in 683.
And according to on Dan Gibson's thesis, that was Petra. You're saying that it was that he actually went to Jerusalem, that these events happened in Jerusalem.
I'm not talking about the actual Qibla of where the Noahides and the scribes and the Pharisees should face, right? I'm only talking about what's important between Muawiya's side and the Karaites and the Sadducees. There is something really fascinating which we need to talk about. We talked about it before we came online, about the exact location of the true Qibla. But that is irrelevant to this discussion at the present moment. Okay, that's irrelevant right now. What I
mean is the stone. So if the stone was then in Jerusalem and it had been there probably from just before, say Umar actually had the stone, and we know that at one point it's actually going to go south. Is it Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr who managed to get the stone or a part of the stone from Jerusalem before he will take it south?
Yeah, so he kidnaps the stone from the cave under the rock, burns down the Kabe Zartosht, and he takes it. And we have a record. He takes it to Mecca, and then we have to think about what does it mean he took it to Mecca. And this is really important because it's the first historical reference to the word Mecca. Before that, we have one line in the Islamic Quran which mentions the word Makkah, and that there was some kind of conflict which took place at Makkah. And it doesn't really tell us any much more about that except that people were trying to get to the Masjid al-Haram, but they were prevented at Makkah. They were prevented from doing so at Makkah. And the modern standard Islamic narrative interpretation of that verse in the Islamic Quran is that the Masjid al-Haram therefore must be in Mecca, and they were being prevented from getting to Mecca, and that's what the verse is referring to. And it says that this is an event which took place when the Quraysh were trying to prevent the Muslims from getting to do a pilgrimage to the Kaba in Mecca. Well, this is the standard Islamic narrative. I don't believe any of that. But what is certainly true is that some events did take place in a place called Mecca, which was to prevent certain pilgrims from reaching Al-Masjid al-Haram. But that could be anywhere. They could have been just because if Mecca is in a valley, then, and it says it's a batin Mecca, which means it is in a valley, isn't it? Then there is no way to get past that except by going back, I don't know how many hundreds of kilometers, climbing mountains, and then going back down along the cliffs to get past Mecca to get to where you want to go. But they were trying to, and there's no water there. You in other words, it's a valley in a desert surrounded by cliffs. And if you want to survive crossing this desert, you have to go through the valley because that's where the water sources are. And you need to drink every now and then because you're a human being. So if you can't get to your point by going through Mecca, you can't get to your place. But definitely, there was a group of pilgrims who were trying to get through Mecca, and they were being prevented from passing through Mecca, and there was a battle there, and that's what the Islamic Quran says. But it does not equate Mecca with the Qibla. It doesn't equate Mecca with Masjid al-Haram. It doesn't equate Mecca with anything except that there was a battle which took place here when a group of pilgrims were trying to get through Mecca, and they were being prevented from getting through Mecca to get to the destination that they wanted to go to. And it says that this was a battle which took place without any weapons. That it was a conflict, but there was no weapons involved in this conflict. And they got through. Okay, so that's all we know. And after that, the next mention of Mecca in the history of mankind is concerning when Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr takes the black stone from the Kaaba Zartosht in Jerusalem, and he takes it to Mecca. And they say specifically that he ran away to the east and took it to Mecca. Well, there's a big problem because Mecca is in the west, and there's nothing much. It's almost close to the sea, so it's like, what's going on? It's really complicated things. Like, if you took it away to Mecca, then where did he take it from after he burnt down the Kaaba? Do you understand the story? Because the standard Islamic narrative says that the Kaaba is in Mecca. So how did Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr burn down the Kaaba in Mecca and then run away with the stone from that location to Mecca? Do you see the problem?
With the thesis of, say, Dan Gibson, it sort of puts things together. I don't think that that's actually what happened, putting everything in Petra, because we know that this guy goes from A to B. But their accounts, which I don't think they are all that good, is that Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, he has basically his position, and it is when al-Hajjaj is starting to attack that Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr does a runner. Putting all of that, say, with the story of Dan Gibson, would be like Petra. I don't know. What do you think actually happened in Jerusalem when you said he kidnapped the stone? I find that very funny, actually.
Yeah.
Do you think that he actually that he was already there? There wasn't a fight. He's not, say, trying to conquer Jerusalem and then take the stone. He's there almost like a passersby. He takes the stone. Maybe by night he burns the Kaaba in there, and then he flees to Iraq.
Yeah, so he's got his army. Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr is based in the east. Clearly, he's based among the people who are called the Bakr tribe, who have a location in the east. I should probably show you the location of the Bakr tribes just so we get a clear picture of exactly where we're talking about. I've got a picture somewhere. Give me a moment. Hopefully, I'll get it up on the screen. I had it up earlier. I'm not sure I'm going to find it now.
Well, East Syria, North Iraq, that region of Iraq.
Yeah, that's right.
Side, yeah.
Yeah, so it's up there, and he's from the Bakr area. Really, I'm just really wish that I could get it up, because I'm aware that other people are watching this, of course, and so for their sake, it'd be nice to find that picture again. I mean, maybe it's not going to happen.
That's right. So he will be actually taking. So you think that he takes, just as it is recorded, the stone east. So he's going to go to his lands of the Bakr tribe.
Yeah, that's him.
And right.
That's there. So he's going to go to this location, which is where the Bakr tribe is. Which is, I'm just showing you so you understand where the Diyar Bakr are, and these are different branches of the Bakr tribe. And it's North Iraq here, there's Turkey there, there's Syria there. And that's actually not far from where I had the other picture just now, where I had all these other things. So he takes it to his location. He takes it back home, essentially. And taking it back home means, I've got to find that here. This is the same location, roughly, we're talking about here. So Mecca has to be around there. And I've actually got the location of where I've actually pinpointed where I think Mecca is right now. And I've shown this and discussed it. This is the original Mecca, as mentioned in the Quran, as mentioned in the story of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. And it is to the east from, of course, the Holy Land. So he takes it from the Holy Land and he goes to the east. Now, Dan Gibson's theory doesn't work, because he would take it from Jerusalem and he would go south. So that doesn't work. It's just he just dismisses the verse which he doesn't want to pay attention to, and he makes up his own story around it. There is some truth to what Dan Gibson is saying, but he's not a very good historian. He may be a very good archaeologist, but he is not very good with the history. Archaeologists are the ones who are on the ground finding interesting facts of physical location of things. And a historian is somebody who interprets all of that stuff. And honestly, Dan Gibson's interpretation is rubbish. It has to be said, it's absolute rubbish. But I'm not going to criticize his archaeological discoveries. His archaeological discoveries are all about the location of he tries to locate the Qibla, where everybody is facing to pray. And I've got that here as well. And he identifies the place where everybody's facing to pray as being in the desert south of the Dead Sea. It says it's around Petra. Now, he tries to then interpret his findings with regards to the location of the Qibla, and he tries to mess up history to try and fit that in, because he's not a good historian. Historians have to read vast amounts of information, things which are considered by the layman to be completely unrelated to the topic, in order to canvass the whole field and be able to find significant points, clues, which help us solve the mystery of history. Well, Dan Gibson simply doesn't do that. He simply does not have the reading. He is very narrow reading. But nevertheless, his archaeology is sound. This is a picture of his lines, where he draws the cross-section of lines of where the Qibla used to be, based on the archaeological examinations of the foundations of all of the earliest masjids across the Islamic Empire. And this is where they converge, around Petra. So he's not wrong there, but it's not precisely Petra. If anybody says it's clear, they all face exactly to Petra, that's a lie. They don't. They kind of converge in the area of Petra, which is basically the desert in the south, and that's an interesting discussion as well. But that is where the Noahides and their masjids are facing. That is not where Muawiya is interested in. He's not interested in that. He's interested in pushing Jerusalem as a center. It's not where Yazid is interested in. He was also interested in pushing Jerusalem as a center, or at least he was interested in making Jerusalem into a Zoroastrian center. It's not where Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr is interested in. He's interested only in the Black Stone. He's not interested in anything else except the black stone. Do you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to ask you how you are doing with time. I'm free, but I don't want to actually keep you too long if you have other matters to attend to and prepare for Shabbat and so on.
Yes, that's true.
How are you
Well,
doing
I've
with
got another
time?
10 minutes. We'll try and get off this, and I suppose we could talk about this another time. But anyway, Abdullah, I'll try and get it quickly. Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr kidnaps the black stone from the Kaba in Jerusalem, and he takes it to the east to Mecca, which is exactly here. If anybody wants to go and research that and get your own Google Maps up and have a look around, this is where it is. And how do we know this? From other corroborated sources of history, especially concerning the location of Ur of the Chaldees, which is somewhere around here, according to Jewish tradition and early Christian tradition, Eastern tradition. Nothing to do, of course, with the Victorian tradition, where it's based way down in South Iraq. Ur of the Chaldees is somewhere around here, like closer to Mosul sort of area, north of Hatra, that sort of area. Haran is over here, Nisbis is here, and we have 5 stations from Haran to Nisbis and 5 stations from Nisbis to Ur of the Chaldees. And halfway between Haran and Ur of the Chaldees, from a different source, we know that exactly halfway between the two, in a straight line, is where Mecca is, which means Mecca has to be here, which is in the Khabur River Valley. Unfortunately, the location of where Mecca is right now has been flooded because it is now a water reservoir, and it's underwater, so we won't be able to do any excavations or archaeological investigations there. How convenient for those who are trying to bury the history of Islam.
Indeed.
And we always find that this is the case. Always find that this is the case. And you'll also notice this is also where the Daesh, ISIS, established their empire and smashed up all the archaeological evidence. How convenient. How convenient for the Islamists that they just so happened to smash up everything that had survived for more than 1,000 years under Islamic rule. Then Daesh think they have to come along and be more holy than any of the Muslims for the past 1,400 years and smash up everything in the area so nobody has any evidence of what's going on anymore. Well, very convenient for the Islamists, and also, in a sense, convenient for us, because if they were not trying to hide something, they wouldn't have done that. And so, that effort that they made is only helping our cause and only helping us show that, we have some truth here which they're trying to cover up. So there you go. So that's where he took it. That's where Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr took it. Then Abdul Malik comes along in 692. And this is really where the center of the Islam is focused during the time from 683 until 692. This is where the center of Islam is. And it's in Mesopotamia. This is the Mecca, which is important. And that's where Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr is. Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr himself issues coins, mints coins, in the same Persian style, with the Bismillahs on them, indicating that Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, despite being very obsessed with this black stone, the Bethel stone, is making concessions to the Ali group, the remnant of the Ali group, who are also in the Iraq area. So he has accepted their book, he's made concessions. Now, I should say that Muawiya had previously made concessions to the Ali group, even after he killed Ali and his sons. Nevertheless, he allowed them to continue to have their religion and to focus on the Quran and to enjoy their prayers and to enjoy their theater. And so Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr is also making concessions to them. They are monotheists. He doesn't mind that. Okay, but his focus is really he's obsessed with this black stone because he's from the Karaite Sadducee group. Okay, and he's kind of the leader after that. After the Alids have been oppressed and suppressed by Muawiya, but then he himself gets his black stone smashed to pieces by Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, who then conquers them all and establishes he unites the empire under a particular vision of Arab nationalism and iconoclasm as well. That happens with Abdul Malik in 692. But
right, and he then goes down in history as the great Islamic reformer when he was, in fact, the great Islamic unifier or Arab unifier.
Arab unifier,
when, yeah.
He's. If you're an Arab nationalist, then Abdul Malik is the guy you need. And this is also because remember, Yazid was not an Arab nationalist; he was a Persian nationalist. So much so that he even rejected his own Arab or maybe Syrian ancestry and origins, and he only was interested in having Persian things on the coins. He was totally into the Persian issue. But Abdul Malik was really the Arab nationalist who consolidates the Arab identity, promotes the Arab national epic, which is these pages which become the Islamic Quran. He has no problem with that. He's totally into creating an Arab empire. And that's Abdul Malik who does that. He consolidates that. But Muawiya's family have not given up on power, and they are still influential, and they come back again as the Abbasids and take over the control. But then they are pragmatic and they are politically savvy. They're not so ignorant that they're going to abolish everything that Abdul Malik has done. They're going to use the Arabic national culture, which has been developed under the Umayyads, but they're going to put it in their own Sasanian imperial style, and hence the Sasanian laws are restored, and that is what we call the Sharia of Islam. But it's not actually Islamic Sharia, it's actually Sasanian law been restored by them. Okay, so I suppose there's one thing we'll do before I go, and that is talk about this true Qibla then. So meanwhile, what's this true Qibla? Which Dan Gibson has identified with his archaeology. What is this true Qibla, which is the important thing for the Quran, the Islamic Quran? It's the important thing for the Ali group. It might not have been so important for Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, because all he's interested in is the Black Stone, but it was certainly interesting for the people that Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr ruled, and it's certainly interesting for the people that Muawiya conquered in Iraq, the Ali group. And they're all interested in this area of the desert of like northern Edom, to the south of Judah, in the desert here. What's the big deal? And Petra, although Dan Gibson, through his lack of reading, doesn't realize that this is the location of Bir Lahai Roy, a very important place mentioned in the Bible, that this is the location of where Isaac lived, where Ishmael lived, where Edom lived, where Jacob lived. They all lived down here in Bir Lahai Roy, which is the well of Hagar when she finds the water in the desert, and the God who sees, which is the Messiah again, tells her where the water is. Now, in Islamic story, they call it the Zamzam well, and so we have the story of Hagar running back and forth, eventually finding the water. They cut out the story of actually the angel appearing to Hagar in the desert, saying, "Don't cry, there's some water here," and this is a sacred spot which has been given to the children of Abraham until they are big enough and strong enough to conquer the land of Canaan to the north. This is the home base, the safe spot for the children of Abraham. It's a sacred homeland for Hebrew people, for Abrahamic people. Okay, not the Israelites who come out and are given the promised land of Canaan to the north, but for all of the rest of the children of Abraham, this is very important. And when the Israelites had come out of Egypt, just to the left of the screen there, across the Sinai Peninsula into the mountains and the desert down there, this is where the children of Israel were wandering around for 40 years. This was the sacred Holy Land for the children of Abraham and for the children of Israel for the 40 years where they are purified until they are pure enough to be able to take the land of Canaan. So it is a very important place. But the other thing which is important to think about here is that this is the location of the mountain. Well, we'd say Mount Nebo is further to the north where Moses was buried. But Moses was buried in this sort of general area. And this is also the location of roughly where Mount Sinai was, somewhere in this area. Mount Sinai is in this area. Everybody associates Mount Sinai with the south here in the Sinai Peninsula, but this is the real location of where Mount Sinai is, somewhere in these mountains of northern Edom. This is the mountain of Seir is here. The Holy Mountain is here. Mount Nebo is somewhere around here. Mount Sinai is somewhere around here. This is a very important location. So we should probably get into that a little bit more. But I'll give everybody this nice little tantalizing snippet. First of all, from the book of Maccabees, before we go away. The tantalizing snippet says, one finds in the records that Jeremiah the prophet ordered those who were being deported to take some of the fire as had been told, and that the prophet, after giving them the law, instructed those who were being deported not to forget the commandments of the Lord, nor to be led astray in their thoughts upon seeing the gold and silver statues and their adornment. And with other similar words, he exhorted them that the law should not depart from their hearts. And it was also in the writing of that the prophet, having received an oracle, a prophecy, ordered that the tent, that's the tent of meeting, and the ark of the covenant should follow with him, and that he went out to the mountain where Moses had gone up. Now that could be Mount Nebo, or it could be Mount Sinai, and had seen the inheritance of God, which is the mountain where he says, come up here and I'll show you the land which you will inherit. Takes up to that mountain. And Jeremiah came and found a cave, and he brought there the tent and the ark of the covenant and the altar of incense, and he sealed up the entrance. Some of those who followed him came up to mark the way, but they could not find it. And when Jeremiah learned of it, he rebuked them and declared, the place shall be unknown until God gathers his people together again and shows his mercy. Then the Lord will disclose these things, and the glory of the Lord and the cloud will appear, as they were shown in the case of Moses, and as Solomon asked that the place should be specifically consecrated. Okay, so what we're talking about is a location somewhere in the desert where Moses was shown the land of Israel, the land of the inheritance, and it's somewhere around here. And that's where Noahides are encouraged to face when they pray. They're encouraged to face towards this place that Jeremiah has taken the Ark of the Covenant. Why? Because we don't pray facing the black stone. The black stone is not important to us. We don't pray facing Jerusalem because Jerusalem is the holy, sacred city. It's not. The only reason why Jerusalem was important is because the Ark of the Covenant was there. And the Torah instruction is that wherever the Ark of the Covenant is, that is the location where we should face to pray. Nowhere else. And so we face towards this desert because this is the correct location of where the Ark of the Covenant is, somewhere in the desert. But we don't know exactly where.
Okay, because the Ark of the Covenant was basically hidden or lost, then the black stone or the stone was what people used almost as a replacement,
Yes.
or at least the Sadducees and the Karaites to say, hey, well, we don't have that, so we will have that. Okay,
Correct.
maybe next time that we speak, we can start exactly at this point with the black stone being taken from Jerusalem to, east, by Abdullah ibn al-Zubair, and then all of these things that happened, because I would really like to know what you think about how it went from there. It ended up in Mecca much later, and how all of that transition happened. So that might actually be a very good place where we can start next time.
Very good. We will do that the next time. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope that everybody out there has enjoyed the show. We have a lot of comments in the chat from various different people. So I'll just put a few up as we part. We have, hey everyone, from Chris Lucas, the Protestant View. Thank you for popping on, Chris. Hope you enjoyed the show today. Now we have a question from Jeremiah 11111, who asks, how well educated are you concerning the history of the 1680 to 1780? And not much, I'm sorry. Sorry to say, I don't really have much except rabbinical information around that time. I mean, I know a lot about the rabbis who were around that time, but I don't know about the history of that particular time. Sorry. And he wants to say that the 1680 starts with Charles of Sweden overthrowing King James Dragoon Onunen of the King James Bible, direct descendant of Mary. I see. So it's kind of a sacred bloodline business going on there. And Jeremiah 111 says Dragoon Onunen is the General Royal Dragoon family, beloved Griffin family, and beloved Eagle family, the 3 eagles of the Noonan family crest. Well, don't know much about it, but any of those sacred bloodline things, the divine right of kings, I'm very much opposed to all of that, of course. As you know, we promote the rule of law and not the divine right of kings, because we believe the Messiah is the law. The Messiah is not actually above the law. He is the law. And so that's our position there. Nobody else can be above him. And then we have a comment from Chris talking to Jeremiah, so that's not really relevant for us. Then we have the correction from HIM, which has given us the correct name for the typus, which was the typus of Constans, and I gave a link to the typus of Constans there. Then we have a greeting from Villainous, who says, "Peace, everyone." And God bless you too. Thank you for popping along. Then we have a few comments from Sean Corley. Says, let's say, Sean Corley here says, "Hello, Joe. I followed your material on the rise of Islam for years, and it's safe to say you are bringing a well-researched and thoughtful introspective view into the research and period of history. Thank you. This research and period of history. Thank you so much for saying so, Sean. It's kind of you to say so." And he asks the question, is Joe intending on bringing this research to a print in a full volume text so it can be peer reviewed? And what would be possible response from Holland, Donna, Cook, G.S. Reynolds, and others? I don't know. I don't think I would do such a thing like that because I'm a perfectionist and I would really want to do a really good job. So I think these chats and shows are the only things you're going to get. But maybe somebody else would like to do something like that, and I wish you all the best if you want to do something like that. Just please do give a reference and say, I heard this stuff being discussed on Joe's channel, and I think it's worthwhile investigating. That would be nice. I don't like it when people just pretend that they've come up by these things by themselves, when actually, I give so much, I give so much help, and the reward or the thanks I get is somebody to come and pretend, oh, I found this reference. And it's like, no, you didn't. You saw it on my channel. Stop pretending. So I would like that, but I don't really need the praise. I just like somebody to recognize that it was me. That would be nice. And then he's got a link here. It says a Bible collaboration with Joe and Reynolds would be brilliant. I would like Reynolds. I think he'd be nice. I think he'd be interested in what I've got to say. Of course, he's a super scholar, so maybe I would be nothing for him. But if he's interested, I'd be very happy to chat with him about these things, especially about the Judeo-Arabic. Would you be brilliant? And anyone interested in this period of history would be enlightened. I certainly think so. I think he's looking for Judeo-Arabic. He just maybe hasn't touched upon it yet. And I hope if he does hear me saying that, he would be, nice enough to say, I heard this chap talking about Judeo-Arabic, and I thought I'd give it an investigation. So that'd be nice. And thank you for your time, consideration, and efforts. Thank you so much, Sean, for commenting, for making such pleasant comments on my channel. It's very kind of you. Now we have a question from Jamil Ibrahim, who says, "Where were the black stone prompt up in Jerusalem? Did they have a Kaba?" I think I made it clear. Did I make it clear, JC, in this show?
Yes, you have. And actually, on the next comment, he says he came in late. So I think he has missed that. So Jamil, if you actually rewind and you go a little bit to earlier on in the conversation, then you will see the pictures, and it is very, very fascinating stuff. So make sure that you get that information later.
Yeah, that's great. So if you do, click like, subscribe, rewind the video, watch it again, and you'll find, I think, a whole treasure of information for today's show. It's a lot of stuff to go through, but then, we're talking about a very intense period of time where a lot of stuff was happening. And at least, it's not like the origins of Christianity, where it's much more obscure, and there's just all we can say is based on Messianic Noahide Judaism. Here we have something which is really much more under the light of history, and it's easier to describe, but only if you have the correct narrative. And the correct narrative is that it emerged from a Messianic Noahide movement. And once you understand that, and you understand the theology of all the different groups, you understand the motivations behind these groups, it's not that difficult to piece together. It's pretty easy, but you do need to know the theology of the different groups perfectly, I would say, very, very well, in order to be able to piece it together. But otherwise, it's not that difficult. Thank you so much to JC for popping along. Thank you to everybody watching this. As I said, if you liked it, like and subscribe. You can always contact me with redjudaism@gmail.com. You can make your comments underneath the video here. One more comment from Sean. He's trying to jump in there before I go offline. Let's have a look. He says, is it possible the black stone originally comes from Mount Jabal al-Awaz in Saudi Arabia? The black stone is mentioned in the Bible, Sean. If you read the book of Genesis, especially the chapters related to the life of Jacob, then you will find the exact location described in there. It is actually coming from originally the mountains of Palestine. And that is, when we do the West Bank, as I said, the mountains of Judea and Samaria. But the West Bank is where it comes from, and it moved around. It moved around a lot. It was smashed to pieces when Abdul Malik invaded Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr's version of Mecca, which is in northern Mesopotamia. But not all of it was destroyed. Part of it was taken back to Jerusalem by Abdul Malik. The biggest part of it was taken back to Jerusalem by Abdul Malik. But the smashed little pieces were glued together, and they were held by Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr's group for a time until, eventually it ended up in Mecca. But we'll get more into that next time. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you will all have a blessed and holy Sabbath. Enjoy the weekend, and we will look forward to speaking to you again next week. God bless you all. Take care. Shabbat shalom. Bye-bye. Thank you, JC.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Bye-bye.